they basically seem to just do everything to prove these right-wing conspiratorial people right, which is hilarious and sad. So the reality of the ZOG, I think, if we're going to posit it like a kind of systematic analysis framework, how would it look like in reality? I think it would look like the Clinton administration. How it would look like like a guy in his early 50s with zero combat experience telling APAC he would charge Saddam Hussein like Bill Clinton did. See, because as I discussed earlier, Bush Senior, he lost the big Zionist donor vote, and Clinton to this day is still the most popular president among this wealthy donor class. One guy just asked their own words. This APAC member said, Bush is like the cow who gave a lot of milk and then he kicked over the bucket. He's not an honest guy. He's not an ally of ours. I'm planning to vote for any Democrat who runs against him. I don't care who it is, as long as he has a chance of getting rid of Bush. Bush had this famous quote. He said it was like 1,000 lobbyists against one little president. This is the most powerful man in the free world, and he's saying that he feels like he's being swarmed and outnumbered. But if that's not enough to convince you, if you're on BitChute, you're probably already convinced I'm probably preaching to the choir. But look at the 1992 leaked APAC tapes of President David Steiner talking to Chaim Katz. And he basically just lays it all out. David Steiner, he says if someone's been good for Israel, no matter who, even if his brother ran against him, he'd support them. And he had known Bill Clinton for 7 or 8 years in 1992. So since the mid 80s, since the start of the Democratic Leadership Council, the sort of centrist mafia of the Democratic Party, really. And he said he doesn't need any money. We already got him $63 million. And he's trying not to play favorites, but he obviously has a favorite, and his favorite is Clinton. And he knows him back from the National Governors Association. He totally has this thing bottlenecked. And he goes even further. He says, I know him on a personal basis. I have friends. One of my friends is Hillary Clinton's scheduler. One of my office's daughters works there. We gave 2 employers from APAC a leave of absence to work on Clinton's campaign. I mean, we've had a dozen people in that campaign in the headquarters. He's got Jewish friends. A girl who worked for me at APAC stood for them at their wedding. Hillary Clinton lived with her. Which is funny because the next year is when the kind of rumors of Hillary Clinton's homosexuality started circulating. Which we'll get into the next part of this deep dive. And, these sort of neo-Reaganites. He goes on to describe Reagan, he had something, meshuggah. It means crazy for people who don't speak Hebrew or Yiddish. I think it's in both Hebrew and Yiddish. Correct me if I'm wrong. But he also liked Reagan. Reagan knew Jews from the film industry, and he was one of the best guys for us, he says. He had an emotional thing for the Jews. Bush Sr. didn't have this. He didn't have this emotional attachment. And throughout the Clinton years, you do see a sort of very visceral emotional attachment. But this leaked tape, it comes out, and it's a big scandal. David Steiner actually has to resign, but it just metastasizes into the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, which is another one of these think tanks that is responsible for the Iraq War. And Bush and Clinton love WINEP. Clinton's coziness with AIPAC goes back to a meeting he had in his home, his actual home, in 1984, which is right before they designed the freaking Democratic Leadership Council, which is like it's like institutionalized Democrat centrism, which it's Reaganism. It's just Reaganism. and he hits the ground running. And this is where we get back into the, what does this have to do with Iran? Because as I said, Iran's my big interest. Um, he's already saying Iran's trying to get nukes in '92. So we've had the same thing, same phrase being used for like a quarter of a century now. So some of our entire lives. And so in '95, he's saying, "Oh, prime sponsor of terrorism." He's blaming them for sabotaging the non-existent Israeli-Palestinian peace process. Funny story. Around this time in the mid '90s, he goes to the World Jewish Congress wearing a yarmulke, and Tom Friedman, he says that's a bit much. He wrote an article called "Too Much of a Good Thing," which is funny, and I think right at that point, you don't. I don't think you need to go that far to prove the utility of the ZOG theory. But just in case I do, I have this very interesting speech Bill Clinton said in 1995 that just lays it all out how he kind of leads from the transition to the Cold War into the War on Terror. He says to AIPAC, legislation is being prepared in Congress, and I could reduce it by as much as 25% of our foreign policy spending, which is a little over 1% of the federal budget and clearly a percentage of our income. As a percentage of our income, by far the smallest of any advanced nation in the world. Oh my God, that. Okay, I don't want to get into the pure numbers of that, and I hate having to keep taking sides, but that's bullshit because the military budget is this huge percentage of the federal government expenditure, and I don't think you can separate that from foreign policy. But he continues, we did not win the Cold War to walk away and blow the peace on foolish penny-wise pound-foolish budgeting. So I ask you to help me win bipartisan support to preserve American leadership to prevent the isolationists from risking all that was achieved in the Cold War and its aftermath. So right here, he's basically promising AIPAC that he's going to, after the Cold War, are we going to scale back? Hell no. So, you know, Kenneth Pollock, who's one of his big foreign policy guys, says that there functionally is no difference between the Clinton administration and the Bush senior administration. But clearly, the emotional attachment drives it, or sincere or not, drives it to a whole another level. So, where does this lead? Well, I'll tell you where it leads. It leads to this liberal hawkishness, which is, as far as I'm concerned, it actually uses the same justifications as the neoconservatives, but it gets a lot more traction because the main power base for these, for interventionism, for APAC, the ZOG, the various lobbies is actually not in the Republican Party as you think. Their base is more the military-industrial complex, but when it comes to the actual think tanks and the financial organizations, and most importantly the media, and of course the Zionist movement in general, the main place is their main core is actually the Democratic Party. They get 70% of the funding from what Grant Smith calls Israel affinity organizations. But right here you get Clinton trying to mobilize the only tool for mobilizing bipartisanship in the U.S., honestly, which is kind of funny because of how they're essentially imitating Reaganites, and if any of these people go too far, they just become a conservative like a year later, and you see this a lot, especially with the Lewinsky affair. But back to these liberal